Well, it is really a delight and a privilege this week to welcome yet another New York Times bestselling author. No, seriously, we rarely have the opportunity to interview someone who is as well known as Kate Bowler, but she happens to be our colleague here at Duke Divinity School and is a friend, and we're delighted to have her with us. Kate, thank you. You say at the beginning about we are all good medicine, and it struck me that your interactions with practitioners suggested that they weren't always good medicine, the practitioners themselves. When were they good medicine?
I've had a long, wonderful time thinking about the sort of burdens of healthcare practitioners and the forces that constantly conspire against their humanity, the short appointment time slots, the precision of language, the sort of litigious subplot, like all of it that makes it very difficult to be people to each other. So moments in which people were good medicine to me, and I can think of so many, they're usually very small acts of acknowledgement. Like I have this anesthetist, Dr. Moon. I hope you guys know him. He's the nicest, but I've only ever seen probably Dr. Moon for 10-minute intervals. And the fact that I know his name and that I think of him with incredible fondness is because he's a perfect example to me of he brings his humanity in like such a short series of gestures. He leans right down to my eye level when I'm scared to explain things. He's got a very calm and warm presence. You can tell he's listening when I'm asking a question. He offers me any assurance that he can and not more, and then he's gone. And every time I think, that guy really knows what he's doing. So it's humanity. It has been the moments in which I understand. So that's a great example of someone keeping to script and keeping within their time frame and still being good medicine. But most of the most beautiful moments for me have been the moments in which people break script, in which they pause for a minute to realize, like, especially in that moment right before they put the face mask on, to see me, like just to see for a second that I was scared and to reach out and grab my hand, or to those little seconds of after a scan or something, or right before, and there's something bumpy that's happened, and if someone just pauses and says, this must be really scary, just some little reflective statement to give me a breath, I have found those to be so deeply meaningful in the course of a medical experience. And I know that none of it is required, which makes it pure gift. Like, gosh, some of the X-ray technicians are the kindest people I've ever met. Like they're like watching you manage fear, and they're helping you manage. They're just with the little things, like just trying to make the day gentler. I could hug them every time. So it's usually in these very small acts in which we're constantly trying to preserve one another's dignity. Those are great moments. But I think that fear really is, we can create these situations sometimes, especially when a doctor has to deliver bad news, in which they seem more afraid of getting off script than in trying to answer the question itself. I still think it must be one of the hardest things in the whole world to do. So I honestly can't imagine there are ever perfect words, truly. I just know that the ones that mattered most to me were the ones that were given and then allowed a pause to create a conversation instead of a speech.
There was a moment where, to read about it's harrowing. You thought you had a tumor come back, and you were told that. And then you have a friend, a physician, come over and start to make sense of it and spend what sounded like an extended period of time going through voluminous medical records, which I can imagine. All of us who deal with EMR know there's a lot to look at.
Yeah.
And it turns out it was a misreading of a film. And you talk to the doctor, your cancer doctor, and you get the sense that the doctor says as much, like they're a little irritated that you didn't reach out to them. And I could feel myself resonating with that sense of being exposed. And this is one of our fears, I think, exposed for screwing something up, for making a mistake, for not seeing something that we might have seen that leads to suffering on the part of patients. I mean, what can we learn from that? Tell folks about that, and then kind of what do you take from that?
Sure. Because it had been, I showed up for what I thought was just going to be a very, one of those in and out meetings to just check on my surgical scars after my liver resection. And I'd had one of those before, so I knew how it went, and I went alone. Because often I go alone when I'm trying to just like muscle through.
Yeah.
And the surgeon said, unfortunately, when looking at the progress, there's been an enormous breakthrough tumor. And I knew that you weren't really supposed to have breakthrough tumors at this stage with the drug that I was on, that it was statistically almost impossible. And that if it had, then that meant that I had the kind of, that I had, it was honestly, it was like statistically meant that things were wildly and suddenly out of control. And because I had read all the studies on, I was on a drug called Keytruda and what Keytruda should be doing 2 years out. And so he said, well, so he left the room for a little because he could tell that my brain was exploding. I was just when I'm quiet, my brain's usually exploding. And he said, well, I went to talk to your doctor and we're going to send you to radiation. And at that point I knew that's like, this is the buttery slide now. This is how it goes. And so I came home and I had kept all my medical files and I had been poring over them. And then I started going through them again. Like, where had there been, it must've been a spot that might have, so you're just like combing through. And then my friend came over to help me go through it. And then we just found some very unusual language that said something that in an earlier version of they have 2 radiologists sign off on it, that the first one had said that there was signal dropout in segment 4. And I was like, well, is this new tumor in segment 4? And what is segment 4? And so we're Googling, we figure it out. And then the friend calls a radiologist, and then we're both over the moon when the radiologist is like, oh, it's just, it's very common to have like poor scan quality in that area. And that instead of a tumor, it's just a fat deposit. And I have never been happier to be called fat, like never, truly, not once in my life, more thrilled. And so instead I still have this radiation appointment on the books. And so I thought, well, so I contacted my oncologist right away to say, hey, like, I'm not dying. I have this, I'm not dying. It's just like a scan failure. And once the second radiologist saw it, they corrected the report and it's okay. And you could tell how, it seemed to like, the sort of veil drops, and he seemed more concerned that that I was going to be so angry that I would want to contact someone. You could tell there was just kind of like a carefulness about his. So he wouldn't acknowledge that they made a mistake. And he said, I'm sorry you feel that way, as if you feel a certain way about tumors. And I have to admit that all I really wanted in that moment was not to be told that I was ridiculous for being scared, because the situation was absolutely terrifying. And I knew I was reading the situation correctly, but I just wanted someone to say, I'm so sorry you went through that. What an awful experience. Like, just that would have meant the world to me. And I recently, please ignore this part just because it's funny and ridiculous, but I was bitten by a snake recently and I had to be in the emergency room for a couple, like 48 hours as I went through the copperhead snakebite protocol. And I was envenomated and it was very exciting. And I laughed the whole time because I truly could not believe that I am the luckiest girl in the whole world. And so then I had this wonderful nurse and I could tell based on her interaction with other patients that she had like a very tender heart. And because we spent several days together, she eventually told me that she's quite young and she had just lost her husband very suddenly to heart failure. And in the meantime, she's also a pandemic nurse and people are yelling at her and she's cleaning up beds and she's doing blood work. And I mean, unthinkable courage on her part. And it was late one of those nights. And she, she looked at my chart and she said, oh, I guess you've been here a lot before. And I told her a little bit about it. And she said, Kate, I'm just going to be honest. No one's ever going to apologize. So if you don't mind hearing it from me, I'm so sorry.
Wow.
And when she said it, as if like it was up to her to take responsibility for things that were just never going to be her fault. I have to admit that it felt so unbelievably healing just to have somebody just see that it had cost me something and just to have that moment. And I don't think I will ever forget like the gift of that.
I was struck when you talked about, I'll read it. My precarious diagnosis has triggered a series of mental health assessments at the cancer clinic, during which lovely and well-meaning counselors, all seemingly named Caitlin, are telling me to find my meaning. And you were pretty gentle here, but at the same time, you poke a little fun at this whole discovering what you're supposed to do in the time that remains. And what would you say, as a Christian and as you specifically, given your experience about this whole finding your meaning in the when you're dealt a hand that you did not expect?
Yeah, it was one of the cultural scripts that I was most interested in, I guess, as a historian and also as somebody who is trying to figure out, I guess one of the theological questions that I had underneath that was, do Christians experience a different kind of enoughness in their lives? Are we supposed to, it's just a theology of sanctification, right? Are we supposed to grow in such a way that we feel full? Will our faith make the limitations of our time and our bodies amount to something like enoughness? I was very stressed out about that. There was a lot of me calling Edgardo and Warren and other professors to be like, am I just garbage? Because I feel like I will be hungry forever. Like I look at my son and I feel like I'm going to starve to death. Like, am I as a Christian not supposed to feel that way? Because if so, I'm obviously doing it wrong. And so they gave me a lot of like actually wildly helpful books about appetites and virtues. And I think part of the question was because the secular answer to the question in something like bucket lists or sort of the idea of you check off experiences is that a finished life is one that can be accomplished. And as people of faith, we know that that's not true. And yet it is hard to know what to do with all that remains, like we're such bad math, we're just never neat sums. We just have all this desire and ambition and hopes and want for more. And so where is there in our faith for that? And so that was, I guess, in the end, I think mostly as a result of the good advice of other people on faculty was that our hungers are partly God's. It is our creatureliness, and it is a sign that we are awake to our loves. And that honestly, the more we love, the more painful our lives will get. Love is not a solution, and I don't think there will be an end of it. I think we will always want more. And I'm okay with the unfinishedness of that kind of life.
Let me turn to a question. It seems that the humane practitioners whom you met, whether the anesthetist or the radiology techs or others, were people who had a gift for empathy and therefore understood when you were scared or needed companionship. Do you think that empathy captures that healing quality? And if so, do you think it's something that can be taught or developed?
Yeah.
Or is it sort of a gift that some people have and others don't?
I am going to say something that I can't possibly back up, but it has stuck with me. And I did an episode recently with this nurse named Christy Watson, who had been running a lot of the United Kingdom's sort of ecumenical protocol and how to swap in out different kinds of chaplains and with people who were needing like an end of life companion when families were barred from the hospital. And so she was right on the edge of trying to figure out how do we deal with mass grief with few resources. And she said that nursing was, as a discipline, as a set of practices, as an interpretive strategy, both as training and not just temperament, was the ability to love a stranger. And she said, and she's not a Christian. She said love, and she meant love as in, if you can't read the granularity of like the fear that you're describing, that beautiful question, if you can't see how the temperature of the patient and the way that maybe like the light is in the room, and whether you can see if their skin is sallow, if you can't love the specifics of them, that you can't treat them and you can't serve them. And so I have to admit, I want something more than empathy. I think if I could ask for it, I would want something closer to love. And I think we could all do it. I really do.
I'm going to throw in a quick question of my own here. You're mentioning these friends and your Bishop Will, who figures in a few places in your books. Always, every one of them makes me laugh. There was this moment right after you had your first big surgery, which was obviously traumatic in lots of ways. And they're all around you, and you said they're blessing the crap out of you. And for a moment, I can't remember exactly how you put it, but I think you said something like, for a moment you felt whole. Yeah. You were whole again, and then they were gone and you were alone.
Yeah.
Yeah. We're clinicians. We watch people get sick. We watch people come in. We watch people not come in to see them. Talk about the aloneness and when you can encourage families to gather around and so on.
Oh my gosh, because because a tragedy is a moment of such intense surrender and alienation from your own life. Like you kind of get kicked out of the life you had. And I found that people had wonderful tricks up their sleeve to remake the feeling that I was not then a stranger to myself. So, and it's just such small things like a hand on my shoulder, or even, spiritually, we've got lots of good stuff. We've got anointing oil. We've got people who sing for you and pray for you. And Christians got all kinds of wonderful historical things to do, but just family and friends, small delights, just lotion that smells nice, someone who remembers to bring your hairbrush, someone who sends you a funny joke, someone who, and this I really try to do now, is if someone tells me that they're scared of something that's happening or they've got news they're anticipating, by the time it happens, it's going to be really hard to remember. So I will just put it in my calendar. 6 months from now, ask blank about this. Because the problem is not necessarily that they don't have a person to rush in. The problem is, I find with the persistence of pain, is that 6 months, a year down the road, they've sort of cashed in all of their emotional chips and they're worried about still being difficult to love. To be honest, I lost most of my friends over the course of this, and I've had a lot of friends. So I know that it's not easy to keep the people that you need to go on, and we all need people to carry us. So if you want to be the friend to the chronic person, or just make a little note to check in, they will be so thrilled that you remembered.
This can be our last question. Just recognizing the time. There are a lot of examples of how the church or Christians have not handled suffering well. How do we remove prosperity gospel and other pithy ways of saying things, but keep our faith?
Yeah.
Because as a follower of Jesus, I've seen things that I can't unsee, like miracles. So how do we hold on to faith and hope, but not be hurtful about it? And I will just say, in the book, this question of hope, which you describe at one point as something that needs to be managed like arsenic, the dosing feels like you get too much, it's going to kill you. But closing thoughts on that, Kate.
Yeah, because as Christians, we are people who believe that God is saving us and saving the world, and that we are being drawn toward a story of where there will be no more tears and no more oncology and no more pandemics and no more separation. And so I think the thing that I've tried to do, though, is the ones that felt hurtful were the ones that tried to imagine that our spirituality, that our faith, that our hope will and knowing, of course, that miracles do exist, that they are a solution. When, as my friend Jerry Sitzer said the other day, who lost much of his family in a car accident, he said, Kate, the dirty secret about miracles is that they don't last, because it's all a temporary. It doesn't solve the problem of our finitude in the end. And so I think we stay open to the possibility of God's sudden action, but we know that the story is longer than just the whether or not my life works out, or any single example. We don't freight it with that much theological weight that we're forcing people to say, well, heaven's going to be amazing, or as if but that this is a long story about God saving the world, but that is not the same thing as making one individual believer responsible for saying that means that life must be easy or solvable.